In 1885, a German refugee named Fred Stein was being treated at New York Hospital for a cancer on his neck. And this was the fourth operation, and the cancer had come back and was now spreading all over his body. In the hospital, Mr. Stein developed a skin disease, a skin infection called erysipelas, and he almost died. He had high fevers, he had chills, he had reddening of the face and of the skin. But a remarkable thing happened, that when he was cured of the erysipelas, the cancer was gone. They made note of this in the records, but they dismissed him from the hospital, and then he went home to Lower Manhattan, where he lived. 7 years later, when William B. Coley was trying to find some cure or some effective treatment for sarcoma, he looked through all the records of New York Hospital, and every patient who had that extensive disease had died, except for this one remarkable case. But nobody knew what happened to Fred K. Stein, and so he went searching for him. He had a picture of Stein, and eventually he found him living near City Hall in Manhattan, and the man was completely free of cancer. William B. Coley was actually curing cases of cancer in the period from 1893 to 1933 that are not considered curable today. You can see people with very advanced disease, on the point of death, who were rescued through the aggressive use of a fever-causing mixture of killed bacteria. And we can't give that treatment to them in the United States. It's been banned since 1963.
Please welcome this year's laureate, Jim Allison.
Hello. Well, thank you, Dr. Smith and Mr. President.
We can't say the word cure. I think, and not lightly, because there are people who, relapse early on, but somewhere close to 60% of patients have complete responses.
You still can't find a single good clinical trial of Coley's toxins, even though Coley was curing cancer, advanced stage 4 cancer, 100 years ago.
And so certainly there's no pharmaceutical company that will fund a study like that.
The economical system is always a company has a virus, a patent for that, and then they do the trial.
Around 70 new immunotherapies made it to the market. These are mainly all drugs, these are mainly all targeted therapies.
The crazy thing is that we are not allowed to show our data. This is nuts.
War on cancer has not been successful.
It's been an amazing journey from the blacklist to the Nobel Prize. My name is Ralph Moss. I am a science writer. I have written almost exclusively about cancer since 1974. I was hired at that time as the science writer for Memorial Sloan-Kettering Cancer Center. There were some treatments, and particularly Laetrile, a derivative of apricot kernels, that our research had shown to be positive. And my employers at that time chose to lie about the results of these experiments, and so I exposed that and was fired, of course, on the next day after I held a press conference about this. So I have a a great interest in the question of so-called alternative treatments, but I'm also very interested in the conventional treatments as well. I mean, I don't really see the world as divided up in that way. There are only effective and ineffective treatments. Even 40 years ago, I understood that the great hope of cancer treatment was with the immune system. This is the great untold story in cancer therapy, the story of William B. Coley and what happened to his treatment. The biggest cover-up in cancer is the cover-up of the effectiveness of Coley's toxins. And that 100 years ago at Memorial Sloan-Kettering Cancer Center, they had as close as we've ever come to a cure for cancer. Starting in 1893, Coley started to give a mixed bacterial vaccine of killed bacteria to cancer patients at Memorial Sloan-Kettering. Hundreds of people were cured of cancer in the early part of the 20th century. What happened? Why didn't this become universally known and universally accepted? You had the rise of radiation therapy and then later chemotherapy, and these put big industrial players into the field of cancer research. And so the Coley's toxins were incredibly inexpensive to produce, and they couldn't compete commercially with radium or radiation equipment, or especially with chemotherapy. In 1963, against vehement objections from the Coley family, the Food and Drug Administration refused to grandfather in Coley's toxins. It had been an approved medication, and then they went against their own rules and they refused to allow it to be sold anymore in the United States, and this basically killed it. The American Cancer Society in 1965 put Coley's toxins on its unproven methods of cancer management list and book, which was the most damning thing that could happen to a cancer treatment. Everything conspired against the Coley's toxins, and the leaders of Sloan-Kettering for many years, although they professed an interest and a desire to have the story told, in actuality we know from letters and papers in different archives that they were working actively behind the scenes to prevent any further research into Coley's toxins. My whole world was turned upside down in 1975 by my association with Helen Coley Nautz and Lloyd J. Old. They were like joined at the hip, Helen and Lloyd. They were kind of an odd couple because Helen had no formal training in science, and Lloyd was, even then, one of the most eminent immunologists of his day.
Lloyd Old is, of course, one of my heroes. Lloyd Old detected TNF-alpha. And I'm making use of his work and his detection every day of my life.
Lloyd Old's successor at the Cancer Research Institute is James P. Allison.
Lloyd, I first became aware of his work in the 60s, and I went to the library. At that time, we actually had journals, books and stuff, and we read a lot about Lloyd's work and then about T cells, the T cell receptor. And I just decided, that first of all, I wanted to unravel the secrets of T cells, and I figured when we figured that out, then maybe we could do something about cancer.
He said to me at one point, "Do you want to know where we get all our new ideas from?" And he got up and walked behind me to the bookshelf in his office and took down a book and then handed it to me. It was the American Cancer Society's book, Unproven Methods of Cancer Management. He said, "Here, this is the Bible." Helen had no official position at Sloan-Kettering, but she was the daughter of William B. Coley, and she had founded an organization called the Cancer Research Institute.
Very prestigious and powerful research organizations which are funding more than 150 postdoc trainings yearly. And I was one of them. So she was not a medical doctor, but she was a scientifically extremely educated lady with an honorary doctor from Rockefeller University.
They had together produced an amazing body of work, mostly Helen's effort. She wrote almost 20 monographs, which were like single subject books on her father's work with the Coley's toxins or Coley's fluid. And the successes were extraordinary. You can go down the lists of Helen's monographs and see case after case after case of people with dire disease who then survived 30, 40, even 50 years after that time. These are almost completely unknown today. I have the set that she gave me with her own typed in additions and so forth, and I cherish this series of books. Look at them almost every day, but almost nobody else knows about them. People denied that there was any validity to the immunotherapy. Lloyd despaired of opposing the establishment. And so his thought was, well, let's go to the root of the Coley's toxins, because we can't really prove that Coley's, in the modern sense, through randomized controlled trials, we can't really prove that Coley's toxins works. This was his view. Coley died the year before the randomized controlled trial was even invented. So let's do basic research. Lloyd had directed $200 million in research funding towards cancer immunotherapy and had recruited over 1,000 researchers into the field.
So when I then was introduced to Helen Coley-North, a circle closed. I really felt I'm back to the roots.
Immunology as we know it today could never have developed as long as it was being stigmatized as a so-called quack treatment, which it never was, of course. It was the most promising treatment that developed up until the modern day.
Dr. Coley's daughter established a research center in New York. One of the major researchers and collaborators of that lab was Dr. James Allison.
In the 60s, when sort of the idea of immune surveillance came to the fore, and people began to think that, first of all, that's why we have an immune system, which I think is not true. I mean, I think that's demonstrably not correct. On the other hand, we have an immune system, and it's demonstrably true that it does, have anti-tumor effects.
James P. Allison of the MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston is one of the greatest immunologists in the world today. He radically revised our understanding of how the immune system relates to cancer, and he won the 2018 Nobel Prize for his discovery of the first immune checkpoint inhibitor drug, Yervoy. This drug, as well as Opdivo and Keytruda, have revolutionized the way in which cancer is treated today. They break the link between the cancer cell and the immune cell, freeing up the immune system to attack and kill cancer.
So a T cell is being controlled by those checkpoint inhibitors. And that's what those Nobel Prize winners found out, that these checkpoints can be blocked. So we are blocking the blocking, we're inhibiting the inhibitor, we're breaking the break.
This woman I know was 22 years old when she was diagnosed. She had brain mets, liver mets, lung mets, she had everywhere. And, she was hospice bound when she got hit. Her tumors went away, and, that was 14 years ago. So she's one of the early people in it. But a doctor said, you really should think about not having babies. And so for several years she did that. And finally, after a while, she just said, to hell with melanoma. I'm going to get her down. I'm going to have kids. I'm going to live my life. And she did. She just, said, I'm having kids. So she's had 2 kids, and everybody's fine. One of them's 10 now, I think, and the other one's 7 or something like that. I saw them recently. There's a woman from the phase 1 trial of IPI from 2001 that she got a single dose. She's still alive. She's almost 19 years out now without any more treatment, without any recurrence. Just surgeon stood up and said, Jim, you just can't use the word cure because cure means there's not a single tumor cell live, in the body. And we see spots on CAT scans. So you can't say that they're tumor-free. But if you biopsy tissue where that spot is, when it's been done, there's never any cancer in it. It's like a crater in the battlefield, it's scar tissue where the fight was going on. And so it's a semantic question. That doesn't mean there's not a few tumor cells. And I said, but remember, you're treating a patient, not a CAT scan. High dose radiation, high dose chemotherapy, a lot of them, do obviously immunosuppress people. But on the other hand, there've been a lot of studies recently that show that a lot of the chemotherapies don't work all that well in animals that don't have immune systems. In other words, that there is an immune component to even the chemotherapy.
So you kind of flipped oncology on its head. The things that were the hardest to treat now are the things that are most effectively treated.
Yeah, that's the way it seems.
I was so happy when Dr. James Allison won the Nobel Prize last year, and they found out that, yes, it has been very valid area, valuable area in treating the cancer patients.
I think Jim Allison has done something very important, and that's that he has awakened the entire audience, both the healthcare practitioners, the oncologists, the patients. He has awakened them to the concept of immunotherapy for cancer, because for so many years, immunotherapy has been ignored. It's simply cytotoxic chemotherapy. We have to blast the cells and we're going to win the game. And we've had so many years to show that doesn't work.
Keytruda has gotten a lot of popularity because of President Carter's melanoma. In fact, they call it President Carter's treatment because he was healed.
I will commonly use the checkpoint inhibitors in low doses in combination with other techniques and actually achieved complete remission.
The problem with it sometimes is that with this approach and the way checkpoint inhibitors work, you sometimes have no effect, sometimes just the right effect, and sometimes an overwhelming effect. And it's hard to predict.
Yeah, some people died in the early trials because of ipilimumab, and the reason was because we never saw any adverse events in mice except some vitiligo and melanoma models here, which was expected. But we never saw anything else, no weight loss, no anything. And then gave them doses 10 times, 100 times as high. And for 6 months straight, no adverse events whatsoever. And then it goes into people and bam, there's stuff. And I think the reason is that the mice, are kept absolutely as clean as we can keep them. I mean, most people have had thousands of infections, and so it's easy to, I think what's going on is just, it's complex. Very quickly, like with any drug, the physicians who used it developed algorithms for treating it, so almost nobody dies of the colitis anymore. That was what killed people early on. But what it appears now is there is a correlation between adverse events and response. So in other words, if you have an adverse event, you're more likely to have a satisfactory outcome.
There are many, many links between the early development of Mrs. Nautz and Lloyd Old and the current acceptance of immunotherapy. The Cancer Research Institute, which is a thriving organization today, has only had 2 scientific directors, Lloyd Old and James Allison. Jim Allison won the William B. Coley Award. His wife Pam also independently won the William B. Coley Award. Jim Allison is the chairman of the scientific board of Cancer Research Institute, which was founded to promote William B. Coley's work.
With Coley's toxins, taking 2 specific bacteria, we kind of set the immune system on fire and say, go, and then we sit back and wait and see what happens. And to be honest, we're doing some similar things with the checkpoint inhibitors.
There's virtually no research going on into the Coley's toxins per se, and the position of the Cancer Research Institute is that modern immunotherapy, such as the immune checkpoint inhibitors, are better than Coley's toxins. So why would we bother to use the Coley's toxins?
One of the obstacles to using checkpoint inhibitors is cost.
The immune checkpoint inhibitors cost, on average, about $150,000 per patient. The actual cost of the treatment could run as high as $1 million per person.
Typically, insurance won't pay. And then you have to say to the patient, either you're going to pay out of pocket or it's not going to happen.
Now, if you take a poor country like Peru, there's data to show that these new immunotherapy treatments could only reach 5% of the population in Peru and can only reach 10% of the population in the richest country in Latin America. 90% of humanity is going to be left out of this equation. The Coley's toxins, it would cost, with good manufacturing processing, it would cost $1,000 or $2,000 to create enough Coley's toxins to treat each individual. I had a researcher tell me, she said, I can make this stuff in my sleep. Every country in the world could make it. There's no patent on it. In the light of what we know about Coley's toxins, it's only reasonable that some people would want to get immune therapy independent of American academic institutions. In the 1970s, there were several clinics that were already administering immunotherapy in the United States. The most famous of these was the clinic of Dr. Lawrence Burton in Freeport, Bahamas. Because I had gone down to that clinic and had written fairly favorably about it, I was asked by 60 Minutes to comment on Dr. Burton's treatment. This treatment was similar in some ways to immune checkpoint inhibitor therapy, but was never given the recognition that it deserved. Yet it remains a treatment of tremendous interest today and a model for many things that have come since then. Now, there are clinics around the world that do immunotherapy for individuals, and they've been in business for decades, and we're interested in exploring these as well as understanding what kind of results they get and what methods they use. The German-speaking part of Europe is a world center for the treatment of cancer with non-conventional methods, including immunotherapy.
We perform a brand new treatment which is called immunopheresis for cancer. We are removing something from the patient's body. This is the new thing about it. We're not giving something, removing something. We were looking for a nice place where we could treat patients on a private basis. And we found this beautiful property here in southern Bavaria, directly located at Lake Chiemsee. And we fell in love with it, and we said, this is where we have to treat patients because this is a place where they can get well. I was always keen in applying natural medicine, which I can do at the moment because what we do is absolutely natural. We don't use any chemotherapy at all. We apply a subtractive therapy where we remove something really which is made by the patient's body. We're just removing natural things, and the patient is enabled again to detect their own cancer in their body and destroy it. There are blocking factors, inhibitors you can call them, in the patient's blood, and they really protect the cancer cells. And we know that these receptors are in the patient's plasma. So therefore, we had to figure out a way to get to this plasma, and we found a way to remove them effectively. We have a machine, and there's a filter in this machine, and the filter has a lot of membranes in them, and these membranes have little pores in them. The formed blood particles stay inside the membrane, and the non-formed blood particles, which also include the soluble receptors, they can be pressed to the membrane. We're kind of washing the patient's blood, and therefore the immune system is then enabled again to attack the cancer directly in the entire body. This is a process which takes place over several hours. The patient then has a break, and the adsorber is regenerated in the lab, and then it can be reused again. Because of its immunological approach, the treatment can work on all kinds of different cancers.
I have breast cancer discovered in 2008, and I came here with a stage 4 cancer, breast cancer, with metastasis. Well, my typical day is like this. I wake up, I take my tea. It takes 1 minute to get to the treatment. Kieran connects me to our healing device. We call him Carl. After 4 or 5 hours, I am working on the computer. I can read, listen to audiobooks, etc. I can do all the things without any problem. Then it finishes, I go home. That is all. It's very soft, without any problems. Well, I tremble, it's cold sometimes.
If the patients have the first treatment, they can have some shiverings and some cold feeling, really like if you have Coley's toxin, like you have an immune response.
So Kieran brings me hot water.
They can have an elevated temperature.
And sometimes there is trembling uncontrollable.
They can feel probably something. If they have liver mets, they might feel something, or bone mets, they might feel something. They might have some increased pain for that.
Then we put a little bit of relaxing thing. That is all we use.
There are very, very few side effects. And these side effects are actually not side effects, they're actually wanted immune effects.
About side effects, just let me see. No, I don't. We don't have side effects. No, only positive effects.
This, in comparison with checkpoint inhibitors, is amazing. We saw some impressive results which convinced us to take this technology a step further. We wanted to really get it out of the research section. And to do this in Europe, you have to get a so-called CE mark, Certificat Européen, that actually shows that your technology is safe and effective. Once you have that, you can market and sell the technology in entire Europe and certain countries like the Emirates or other countries which acknowledge the CE mark. Universities, some major universities are collaborating with us, and also some other German clinics have committed to this, but at the moment it's only available here.
I think what we have found is probably more significant than we can imagine now. Nobody believes this, they say, hey, wait a minute, this is not possible. But we can show it. Fever is the ability of a human being to react to 3 things: a virus, a bacteria, or a cancer cell. That's it. The idea behind everything is to understand the difference between chronic malignant inflammation and the ability to raise an acute inflammatory response, which is fever. We should be able to develop fever, natural fever. Somebody who tells me he or she hadn't had fever in 20 years, I'm healthy, I'm never, not good. I wish everybody of us, including myself, would have a fever one time, one day every 1-2 years is enough. And if you ask 10,000 cancer patients, hey, tell me about your fever history, the majority, 9,900, would say, fever? What is this? I have no idea what that is. So the missing history of fever and the incidence of cancer is directly correlated. I wrote books about that. Nobody's interested because you can't patent fever, The backbone of the therapy, of course, here is hyperthermia and immunotherapy. They generate mild fever inside of the tumor tissue, but also in the whole body. What we now discovered that we integrate a way to create a natural fever in a human being with a drug called interleukin-2, which is originally developed to stimulate the T-cell response, a very powerful drug, very dangerous drug, and we have repurposed it. We have literally shown this drug can be safely administered under very careful monitoring. In my lifetime, I will be able to initiate studies which will not only in large case series like we are doing right now, but in prospective trials we will show that this treatment is safe and effective.
Most doctors had no idea what we could do against cancer with immunotherapy. And over the years we learned that the cancer is part of the immune system. I started in 1986. I did conventional oncology and I saw low success rate. We gave chemo, and the promise that could improve cancer was really only for a short time. Let's say a typical patient, a breast cancer patient with metastasis coming to us, the first step is seeing whether she has enough white blood cells, enough monocytes, enough hemoglobin, and enough platelets. The white blood cells are the immune system, and a part of the white blood cells are the monocytes. Then we separate the monocytes, and then we fractionate them. We give a lot of infusions that bring down inflammatory processes. Also, we combine local hypothermia with the dendritic cells. So the combinations make it more likely to have a success. Newcastle disease, the first use was 1905. But we have nowadays other viruses which are even more successful than this. We choose animal viruses, and mostly animal virus for vaccination of animals. Birds for chicken. Farmers have it in their shelves. And in human beings, we can't get the disease. The Newcastle disease is a bird disease. The tumor gets the infection, not the healthy cells. You also get a very beautiful discrimination. One activated killer cell can kill 200,000 tumor cells. If you resect the tumor and give immediately after the surgery the vaccine, the survival rate is fantastic. Then we're talking about 80 to 100% survival. Cancer is the result of a chronic inflammatory process. When there's no inflammation, no cancer. First of all, I'm treating cancer patients. So understanding more about the immune system is the possibility really curing, not only treating symptoms.
Unsere Therapie den Namen von einer tumorspezifischen Immuntherapie. Das heißt, wir aktivieren das Immunsystem ausschließlich gegen das Tumorwachstum. Wir aktivieren das Immunsystem nicht allgemein, sondern gegen den Tumor. 1995 war es soweit, dass man einen guten Effekt hatte in der Bekämpfung von HIV-Erkrankungen mit neuartigen Therapien. Und somit habe ich dann die Erfahrung, die wir vom Immunsystem gelernt haben in dieser Zeit, dann langsam in die Onkologie rübergebracht. Das war ganz neu, weil die Leute haben vom Immunsystem eigentlich nicht so richtig was verstanden. Und daher waren wir eine der wenigen Leute, die sich darauf spezialisiert haben. Und dann haben wir eben geguckt, wie macht die Natur das? Also das ist eine Naturheilmedizin sozusagen, eine biologische Medizin. Das ist nicht so einfach, das Immunsystem gegen Krebs zu aktivieren, weil dem Immunsystem strikt verboten ist, gegen körpereigene Zellen aktiv zu werden. Die Tumorzellen sind ja körpereigene Zellen, die verändert sind und es irgendwie geschafft haben, trotz der Immunüberwachung wachsen zu können. Und dafür müssen wir Zellen ausbilden, die die Lizenz zum Töten bekommen. Wir möchten gerne mit unserer Therapie ein immunologisches Gedächtnis erzeugen, sodass das Immunsystem von sich aus selbstständig gegen die Tumorzellen aktiv wird. The vaccines and hyperthermy and virotherapy, and then is very important the treatment for the tumor environment.
Due to many factors, including the fear of lawsuits, there are far fewer immunological cancer clinics in the United States than there are in Europe. Despite that, several doctors have established clinics in the United States that fight cancer by stimulating the immune system.
About 16 years ago, my mother walked into the emergency department when I was working, and I diagnosed her with metastatic non-small cell lung cancer. At the time, I didn't know anything about treating cancer other than the emergency management of a crisis in the emergency department. But that was the point at which my life changed. I started studying cancer, and now my career is treating patients with advanced stage cancer. I actually consider myself a cancer scientist, and I am not the alternative doctor. I'm not a doctor who thinks I'm just going to cure you by using herbs, by using strictly non-conventional techniques. I look at myself as someone who looks at the science, looks at the data, and will consider using anything and everything that potentially has efficacy based on the data. I offer them a comprehensive regimen, and that comprehensive regimen approaches, or I approach the treatment using multiple modalities. I do often use chemotherapy. However, instead of using maximum tolerated dose chemotherapy, I use low-dose metronomic chemotherapy. And so low-dose metronomic chemotherapy is the concept of using low-dose chemotherapy in a more frequent fashion on a regular basis without breaks, as opposed to maximum tolerated dose chemotherapy. Now, with low-dose metronomic chemotherapy, generally the dose is not high enough to get much cell kill, whether we're talking cancer cells or non-cancer cells. Rather, it works in other ways, through actually stimulating an immune response as opposed to inhibiting immune response. So it is a gentler approach, but not only a gentler approach, but an approach that makes more sense. Really, some of the what we call chemotherapy drugs can be used as immunotherapy. Another modality that I use is the concept of repurposed drugs for oncology. There are many drugs that have been developed over the years whose indication is for another purpose. Antibiotics, of course, are drugs that are created to kill bacteria. But just like they inhibit bacteria, they can inhibit the ribosomes in cancer cells. They can inhibit what's called mitochondrial biogenesis, or the development of more mitochondria for the cancer cells. So the mechanisms through which they inhibit cancer growth are analogous to inhibiting bacteria. There are a number of publications showing that doxycycline in appropriate dosages selectively targets cancer stem cells. Many antibiotics can be repurposed to treat cancer. No substance is inherently toxic or benign. It depends on the dosing. I can take a large amount of snake venom and inject someone and will kill them fairly quickly. On the other hand, if I use a tiny amount of snake venom, I can stimulate an immune response. I have patients who don't want chemotherapy, and I tell them I'm going to give them a low-dose metronomic cyclophosphamide, and they said, no, I don't want chemotherapy. And I have to explain to them that in low dose, it's not high enough to kill any cells, not cancer cells or your normal cells, but it will inhibit T regulatory cells to turn on an immune response. So there are many different substances that we use to immune modulate. Certainly, I would like more freedom to go one step further, but I cannot do that right now.
Since the ancient times, since the time of Hippocrates, they always believed that immune system is important. Those days they didn't know how to explain about the immune system. We have a motto here that healing cancer with everything we got. We could help you. We could help you throughout the disease if you try to see an open-minded oncologist who's going to help you with, finding a path to go. Like you could do this using some of the standard treatments, but try to do it personalized, and then we will help you to go through that. A lot of times they change their mind. So I like to let the patients know that they're not dying, and they gotta sit down, they gotta relax, they gotta, try to find the best way to fight with the cancer, and they may live long, long, long life. We have always looked at the cancer as a bacteria or as a virus, as something from outside. And they have tried to destroy it, to eradicate it with surgery, chemotherapy, radiation. And unfortunately, a lot of times, the treatment has been worse than the disease. It's about 4 decades of the time that war on cancer was announced by President Nixon. And with all the money has been spent in cancer field, unfortunately, we are still having lots of people who are dying with cancer. In fact, according to the statistics from World Health Organization, they're saying that in 2018 there were 18.1 million cancer patients, and then half of these people died in 2018. War on cancer has not been successful. A lot of people died prematurely with the side effects of the treatment rather than the disease. And unfortunately, that had made a lot of people not to go through standard medicine.
It was basically chemotherapy that destroyed Coley's toxins, because chemotherapy is a multi-billion-dollar business. Coley's is an inexpensive treatment. It can't be patented. So there's no way that the Coley's toxins can compete in the marketplace because the drug companies just have no interest in it.
After World War II, the combination of the chemotherapy and the radiation therapy gradually eclipsed the importance of immunotherapy.
And it became dogma from then on that this is the way we should treat cancer.
For most cancers, we don't really have evidence that chemotherapy is curative for advanced cancers.
They may have success in the first few weeks. They will see that the cancer load is going to be less and the tumor is going to shrink, and when there is a shrinkage of the tumor by 50%, they call it a success. They call that this treatment has been successful. But again, regardless of how long it's going to last. Now, unfortunately, with this kind of the treatment, the cancer will recur.
Und dann ist es so, dass die Chemotherapie oder irgendwelche therapeutische Maßnahmen immer nur dann helfen, wenn man sie gibt. Und wenn die Chemotherapie zu Ende ist, dann können die Tumorzellen wieder neu starten, weil die Stammzelle nicht kaputt gegangen ist.
Maximum tolerated dose simply kills every cell that's rapidly dividing, whether it's your normal tissue or the malignant tissue. It doesn't decipher. Well, we've had many, many years to treat solid tumors with maximum tolerated dose chemotherapy. And it doesn't work any better now than it did almost 70 years ago.
When I started with immunotherapies in 2001, there was a little around. Just a few specialized clinics were performing these treatments. In those days, mainstream was really still chemotherapy, of course, surgery and radiation. These were really the drugs and the treatments which were available. In Germany, we were always a little bit more freer to do our things. Big Pharma was already working on immune therapies because they had learned at that time that chemo was not really the solution to all the problems. Patients were not happy with it anymore. People were really in those days were looking for new solutions. And what my hope would be that one day we wouldn't have to have chemotherapy at all anymore.
Hypothermia, also called heat therapy, is the use of special devices to kill cancer cells. Hypothermia is similar to Coley's toxins in the sense that it uses temperature to trigger an immune response against the disease.
There are two techniques. One is the whole body hypothermia, and the local hypothermia is very simple. There is an aerial. This aerial gives a 13.5 megahertz waves to the body, and that is a wavelength that is, has a resonance with tumor cells. They get heated up, the rest of the tissue has no resonance. So you get a hot tumor, and that makes an advantage to presenting better antigens.
It's in widespread use around the world, but much less in the US or the UK than in most other countries.
I would love to use hyperthermia the way it's being used in Germany. The devices that really can achieve temperatures 40 degrees centigrade, they're not approved here, and I'm certainly not comfortable using it here.
We can do that in a local fashion, so not systemically, not throughout the entire body, but in particular areas where people have tumor, to approximately 106 to 109 degrees Fahrenheit. When you apply it over time to a tumor, you get various changes that make the other therapies work better and also affect the tumor in a primary fashion.
The infrared sauna is just beautiful. We have two sets of that. We try to raise their core body temperature. We get a lot of benefits of that. Again, number one, it's gonna be relaxing them. And number two, because the heat, especially when we go close to 102 or 103, which is safe for the healthy cells, but could be weakening the cancer cells, that will boost the immune system. So we use the tent for them. They love it. They lay down and still get the benefit of hyperthermia.
I feel we are ready to take what we have found to the next dimension, and that is, of course, clinical studies.
Really, the next step, which is a huge leap, is in some fashion to individualize treatment.
Diagnosis comes first. Before we develop a treatment plan which is and has to be individualized for each and every patient all the time, always, we have to review very, very carefully the often long-standing up to 10-year history of every cancer patient.
This is something I learned from Lloyd. He had a lot of little phrases and things that, if you don't learn from every patient, you're doing them a disservice and the field a disservice.
Every single person is different and their diseases are different. Even if they have the same disease, that doesn't mean that we should approach them the same way.
Because cancer is a unique disease to every individual, and it's a dynamic disease that's constantly changing.
Look precisely at the patient. What is really going on? And then, according to that, program the cells. Therefore, a so-called standard is not possible. You have got standard human beings and standard patients, but such a creature never crossed my steps. I had only individuals, so I treat each patient according the need for that patient, not for the statistics.
Daher wird die personalisierte Medizin immer wichtiger, dass man sich immer danach richtet, was kann das Immunsystem des Patienten und wie muss der Tumor angegriffen werden, jetzt in der Situation, in der er ist.
Standard oncology is giving you one or several chemotherapy agents. Everyone who has that particular cancer is going to be treated the same. So, if we want to help the patient, we have to practice precision oncology.
Until we actually come to grips with leaving this paradigm of this is your cancer, this is your treatment, we're not going to make great changes. Unique treatments for each individual. That's the home run.
Immunotherapy to me is still what somebody called the sum of all our hopes. We've known as a civilization, as a society, we've known from at least the 14th century that sometimes cancers disappear on their own. I say on their own, in the 14th century, they thought this came through divine intervention. But over time, we realized that it was more frequently associated with bacterial infections. And this is how Coley got into the field, because he found a patient who had, quote unquote, cured himself of advanced cancer by getting an infection. But instead of dying, the man was cured, healed with no treatment, and the cancer went away. Immunotherapy is an attempt to harness that phenomenon of the spontaneous remission in the service of humanity.
The whole immunotherapy rise of cancer nowadays is based on Coley's discovery.
In the last 10 years, immunotherapy has really taken off. And a lot has entered the market. There is a lot of hope for a lot of patients. We're learning more about it, the pros and cons. We're seeing responses, but we're also seeing the negative aspects of checkpoint inhibitors. There will be hope that there will be the combination of immunotherapies, that they can work hand in hand. If we get lucky, if we are successful, if everything goes well, one day cancer will be a chronic disease and not a killer anymore.
My dream was always that somebody comes to the doctor with stomach ache. The doctor take a specimen and send it to the pathologist. 2 weeks later, the patient has an appointment with the doctor, and the doctor says to the patient, "Mr. Miller, you're lucky you have only stomach cancer. You get some virus and some cells, and then we cure it." I see that at the end of the tunnel, I see light, that we can get that.
We are comfortable with what we know, and that's what we've done for so many years. So it takes a long time for another idea to actually come to fruition. Now, the way this game is played is this other idea has to translate into a monetary pharmacologic win. We need to turn oncology treatment on its head and say, it's time to be able to have the freedom to think again.
We need to do customized cancer treatment, educate the patients, use the appropriate alternative medicine, pay attention to their epigenetics and anything which helps them, especially with their immune system. I do believe that we are gonna be a winner in the field of cancer in the future.
If you can show what we can show, we will be successful, There's nothing better for something new than an idea which makes sense. And this idea makes sense.
I would say that it was a battle royal within the highest echelons of American medicine over which direction cancer treatment was going to go in. We're only now figuring out how to extract the best of what Coley demonstrated with this amazing work that Jim Allison and his colleagues have done. Put those together, that's the sum of all our hopes in terms of curing cancer.